Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that half the choices you've made in life were never truly yours. The career you pursued, the people you loved, the grudges you kept, even the small habits you thought were harmless, all of them were quietly orchestrated by something you never invited into the room. An unseen puppeteer, whispering commands in a language you can't consciously hear. You believe you are free, rational, and self-directed, yet beneath the surface another part of you pulls the strings. This hidden presence does not shout. It does not reason, it does not argue. It lurks, waiting. And when the moment comes, it acts with ruthless precision. This presence is your shadow. The shadow is not the monster you see in other people. It is the monster you refuse to see in yourself. Every desire you condemned, every weakness you denied, every impulse you buried so deeply you forgot it ever lived in you, that is the raw material of your shadow. And it does not vanish simply because you exiled it. On the contrary, the more you ignore it, the more power it gains. Carl Jung once warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. What if the life you call your fate is just a carefully constructed illusion, shaped by the hidden parts of yourself that you never dared to face? Think about the arguments you've had with people you love, that sharp word that escaped your lips before you even thought it, that jealous pang when a friend succeeded, that quiet thrill when someone else failed. You tell yourself, that wasn't me, not really. I'm not like that. But who was it then? If it wasn't you, who whispered it into your bloodstream? Now imagine the scale of this. If these unacknowledged forces can shape the way you treat the people closest to you, what do they do to the larger architecture of your life? To your ambitions? To your failures? To the way you see the world itself? The unsettling paradox is this: the parts of yourself you most reject may be the very parts writing your story. Your shadow might be running the show while you take credit or blame for decisions you never consciously made. But here is the greater question. What does it mean to live a life directed by what you refuse to acknowledge? What happens to your relationships when you pretend your bitterness doesn't exist? What happens to your dreams when your fear of inadequacy keeps making practical choices for you? What happens to your sense of morality when your suppressed aggression leaks out in subtle cruelty, masked as righteousness? And what happens when your shadow grows so large that you no longer recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror? The tragedy is not that people have shadows. The tragedy is that they rarely admit it. They play roles, project images, and polish identities, convincing themselves and others that they are coherent, consistent beings. But deep down, something gnaws at them, an unexplainable guilt, a recurring nightmare, a sudden overreaction that feels out of character. These are not accidents. They are signals, like cracks in the facade, hinting at a deeper truth. You might wonder, what's the danger in letting the shadow live quietly in the basement of your mind? If it stays hidden, why not leave it there? But shadows never stay hidden. They slip into your choices, sabotage your peace, and sometimes erupt in ways that burn down the very life you tried to build. So here is the haunting paradox. You believe you are in control, but the more you deny your shadow, the more it controls you. And the moment you say, "I would never," is the very moment you reveal the mask you are wearing. The great question, then, is not whether you have a shadow, it is how much of your life is being lived by a version of you that you refuse to see. And if that's true, are you really living your life at all, or merely acting out the script of your shadow, calling it destiny? As you hold this question in your mind, feel its weight press against your chest, because what comes next is not a comfortable exploration. To understand the shadow is to strip away illusions, to see yourself without disguise, and to realize that the enemy you've been running from has been inside your skin all along. The shadow is not born in darkness, it is born in the light. It is not some external demon that enters your soul. It is created the very moment you decide what parts of yourself are acceptable and what parts are not. The instant you learn the word good, you also learn bad. The instant you strive to be strong, you unconsciously condemn weakness. And so begins the quiet burial of half of your being. As a child, you were not divided. You laughed, cried, screamed, and demanded without shame. You felt rage, joy, jealousy, tenderness, raw, undiluted, unapologetic. But the world does not welcome unfiltered humanity. Parents, teachers, peers, religion, culture, they all hand you a mirror that reflects only the parts of yourself they approve of. Smile and you are praised. Cry too loudly and you are scolded. Share your toy, you're a good child. Snatch it back You're selfish. Little by little, you learn that survival depends on hiding what others cannot accept. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free, but this freedom is poisoned by fear, fear of rejection, fear of punishment, fear of being unloved. So instead of living as whole beings, we fracture ourselves, exiling the impulses that threaten our fragile acceptance. The result is a divided self, a polished persona on the surface, and a shadow lurking beneath." Carl Jung, who gave language to this phenomenon, warned that the shadow is not merely repressed instincts like anger or lust. It also contains undeveloped potential, strengths and talents we abandoned, because they did not fit the story we were told about who we are. Our child discouraged from speaking may bury their voice so deeply that as an adult they tremble at the thought of asserting themselves. A boy mocked for sensitivity may disown his tenderness, only to grow into a man crippled by emotional numbness. A girl told she is too much may amputate her passion, living half a life in the name of being pleasant. This is the hidden problem. In order to belong, we betray ourselves. Arthur Schopenhauer once suggested that human life is marked by suffering, not only because of external hardship, but because of internal conflict. We are at war with ourselves. The suffering we deny within is projected outward, distorting how we perceive reality. If you bury envy, the world will suddenly feel filled with enemies out to diminish you. If you deny fear, you may see weakness everywhere except in your own trembling reflection. Consider this. How often do you accuse others of qualities you despise, only to realize in rare moments of brutal honesty that those same qualities fester in your own heart? Nietzsche called this resentment, the subtle, corrosive poison of repressing one's instincts, only to lash out at others under the guise of morality. In this way, entire cultures can be built not on authentic virtues, but on denied shadows masquerading as righteousness. The modern world has perfected this masquerade. Our society is obsessed with curation, social media filters, performance reviews, polished resumes, brand identities. Everyone is sculpting a mask, but no one asks, what happens to the pieces that don't fit into the mask? They are not destroyed. They are stored. They pile up in the dark. And the more you deny them, the more they swell with energy, waiting for their chance to break through. Psychology confirms what philosophy intuited centuries ago. Repressed emotions do not vanish. They are stored in the nervous system, resurfacing as anxiety, depression, compulsions, or unexplained physical symptoms. Gabor Mate, who has spent decades studying trauma and addiction, shows how denying authentic emotion, especially under the pressure to be good, creates illness. The shadow unexpressed becomes disease, whether in the body, the mind, or the culture itself. But the most insidious root of the shadow problem is this: it thrives in denial. You don't realize your shadow is in control because you convince yourself that you are your persona. You cling to your mask so tightly that it feels like your face, but it is not. The more invested you become in the illusion of being good, strong, selfless, or moral, the more violently you must reject the evidence that contradicts it. And so your shadow grows stronger with every performance of virtue. Nietzsche once declared, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster." The irony is that most of us fight our own inner monsters so relentlessly that we merge with them. We become harsh judges of others, moralizers who condemn in the world what we cannot bear to acknowledge in ourselves. The preacher who rails against sin but harbors secret cravings. The politician who thunders about honesty while quietly corrupt. The spouse who accuses their partner of neglect while hiding their own indifference. These are not anomalies. They are the inevitable consequence of denying the shadow. The root of the problem is simple but devastating. The shadow does not vanish when ignored. It deepens. And the deeper it goes, the less control you have over it. Like a river dammed, its pressure builds in the unseen. Sooner or later, it will burst. Ask yourself, how much of your exhaustion is not from the struggles of daily life, but from the endless labor of holding the mask in place? How many times have you felt an inexplicable anger or sorrow, not knowing it was the voice of your shadow, demanding to be heard? And how much of the cruelty in our world, wars, betrayals, oppression, springs not from conscious malice but from billions of shadows colliding in the dark? This is why Jung warned that confronting the shadow is not optional. It is inevitable. If you refuse to meet it in the light, it will come for you in the dark. And this brings us to the next pressing realization. If we continue denying the shadow, it doesn't just shape our private lives. It reshapes the very fabric of our societies. Its fingerprints are everywhere, in politics, religion, culture, and the quiet despair of everyday people who don't understand why their lives feel hollow. The stage is set. If the shadow is ignored, what are the unseen consequences? How does this hidden force not only guide individual fates, but shape entire civilizations? The most dangerous illusions are not the ones we invent about the world. They are the ones we invent about ourselves. When the shadow is ignored, it does not simply remain hidden. It begins to seep through the cracks of our carefully constructed identities. And the tragedy is that most people never notice until the damage is done. Think of the person who insists they are endlessly kind and selfless, only to explode in quiet cruelty toward those closest to them. Think of the ambitious worker who tells themselves they are just driven, but secretly sabotages colleagues because they cannot bear the thought of being surpassed. Think of the parent who claims to sacrifice everything for their children, while unconsciously binding those children with guilt and unspoken expectations. These are not accidents. They are the shadow, speaking in actions when we refuse to listen in words. At first, the consequences appear subtle, a sharp word here, a quiet resentment there. But over time, the accumulation of denied impulses begins to form patterns, habits of thought, emotional reflexes, distorted perceptions. You believe you are choosing freely, but in reality, you are simply obeying the scripts written by the shadow. Neuroscience provides a chilling confirmation. Studies show that much of human decision-making happens before we are even conscious of it. By the time you choose, your brain has already prepared the action. If what sits in your unconscious is filled with repressed fear, envy, aggression, or shame, those impulses are already shaping your choices long before you can rationalize them. You may call it instinct, gut feeling, or even destiny, but often it is simply the shadow acting first. The unseen consequence is not just personal missteps, it is the quiet construction of an entire false life. Imagine waking at 50 and realizing that the career you pursued was chosen not from passion, but from fear of inadequacy. That your marriage was sustained not by love, but by the shadow's terror of loneliness. That your public persona was built not from confidence, but from a desperate attempt to hide fragility. What then have you been living for? Philosophers have long warned of this hollowing effect. Sartre spoke of bad faith, the way humans lie to themselves to avoid the weight of freedom. Schopenhauer saw how people cling to illusions, numbing themselves against the raw truth of desire and despair. And Jung insisted that whatever we repress will return to us, if not in personal breakdown, then in collective chaos. Consider history itself. Wars are not merely political struggles. They are shadows on a massive scale. Entire nations, unable to admit their insecurities or ambitions, project them outward. The enemy becomes the mirror of what they refuse to face in themselves. Genocide, oppression, ideological cruelty, these horrors are born not from rational choice, but from collective denial. A people unwilling to confront their inner darkness inevitably cast it upon others. But the shadow is not always loud. Sometimes its most devastating consequences are quiet, slow, and almost invisible. Look at the epidemic of loneliness in modern society. On the surface, we are hyperconnected. Millions of interactions, endless scrolling, constant updates. And yet beneath the surface there is an aching emptiness. Why? Because the mask we wear online does not allow the shadow to exist. We present a curated self, smiling, accomplished, acceptable, while our hidden grief, rage, and despair rot in silence. The result is a paradox, a world filled with noise yet stripped of true intimacy. The shadow also reshapes how we interpret others. If you deny your aggression, every assertive person becomes hostile. If you bury envy, every success story becomes an attack on your worth. If you suppress desire, every display of beauty becomes corruption. In this way, your unacknowledged inner world paints itself onto the outer one, making life a distorted mirror. You don't see reality. You see your shadow reflected back at you. The cruelest consequence of all is that by denying the shadow, you also deny your wholeness. Jung argued that the shadow does not contain only what is evil or unacceptable. It also holds our untapped vitality, creativity, and strength. By burying what you fear, you bury what you could become. How many artists have silenced themselves because they feared ridicule? How many leaders never stepped forward because they buried their courage under the mask of modesty? How many lovers have never spoken the truth of their hearts because they banished vulnerability as weakness? The unseen consequence is not only suffering, it is wasted potential, the silent death of possibilities. And yet, there is another layer. The more you run from your shadow, the more it dictates the terms of your life. A person who denies anger may become chronically passive yet secretly resentful. One who suppresses neediness may develop compulsions for control. One who rejects sadness may drown in shallow distractions, terrified of stillness. Every escape from the shadow becomes another leash tied around your freedom. Look closer, and you see the societal cost. Addiction epidemics, political polarization, consumerist obsession, these are not isolated problems. They are the collective shadow at work. Entire industries profit from our refusal to confront ourselves. If you fear emptiness, consumerism will sell you endless objects to fill the void. If you bury insecurity, social media will feed you likes to soothe the wound. If you deny mortality, medicine will sell you the illusion of immortality. The market thrives on your shadow because the shadow makes you endlessly restless, endlessly hungry, endlessly manipulable. And so the question sharpens. If we do not confront the shadow, are we even free? Or are we merely actors in a play written by the forces we most fear? The unseen consequences are not abstract. They are here now, shaping every sigh, every frustration, every false smile. The life you think you are living may already be the life your shadow has chosen. The only question left is whether you will admit it, because until you do, the story only grows darker. At some point, the weight becomes unbearable. You sense that something is wrong, though you may not yet have words for it. There is persistent emptiness in your chest, a tension in your relationships, a gnawing suspicion that your life is a performance you no longer believe in. This is the whisper of rebellion, the faint signal that the shadow is demanding recognition. But how does one break free from a force so insidious it wears your own face? How do you fight an enemy that is you? The first act of rebellion is paradoxical. You do not fight, you look. With unflinching honesty, you turn toward the very impulses you've spent your life fleeing. Rage, envy, lust, fear, shame, rather than condemning them, you let them step into the light. Carl Jung insisted that to confront the shadow is an act of courage equal to any battle, because it requires shattering the illusion of who you thought you were. You are not only the mask, you are not only the curated self, you are also the chaos you buried. And until you admit this, freedom will remain out of reach. Imagine standing before a mirror that does not flatter you, that reflects back not only your polished features, but the twisted shapes lurking behind them. To rebel is to accept this whole reflection. It is to whisper, yes, that too is me. But acceptance is not indulgence. To confront the shadow is not to excuse cruelty or wallow in destructive instincts. It is to acknowledge them as part of the raw material of the human psyche. The alchemist spoke of transformation, lead into gold, darkness into light. The shadow is the lead, and only by admitting its presence can it be transformed. Consider Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, the one who creates his own values rather than inheriting the ones society imposes. This creation is impossible without rebellion against the shadow's tyranny. Why? Because if you remain unconscious of your repressed drives, they will always dictate your values for you. To become free is to integrate, to take responsibility for every piece of yourself and forge it into strength. Rebellion begins in small, radical steps. When anger surges, you ask not, how do I hide it? But what does this anger reveal about what I value? When envy bites, you ask not, why am I so petty? But what buried desire in me is crying out for expression. When fear paralyzes, you ask not, how do I silence it? But what truth about myself is this fear protecting me from? Each question is a torch carried into the cave. And with every torch, the shadows retreat. Viktor Frankl, who endured the unspeakable horrors of concentration camps, wrote that freedom lies in the space between stimulus and response. The shadow narrows that space, making you react blindly. But rebellion widens it. By naming the shadow, you reclaim choice. You are no longer the puppet dancing on unconscious strings. You are the hand that cuts them. Yet rebellion is not solitary. History is filled with individuals who broke free from their shadows and, in doing so, altered the course of culture itself. Dostoevsky confronted despair and transformed it into novels that revealed the fractured soul of modern man. Gandhi faced the violence within and transmuted it into non-violent resistance that shook an empire. These figures remind us, integration is not only personal liberation, it ripples outward, shifting the fabric of society. Breaking free requires rituals of courage, journaling the thoughts you dare not speak, sitting in silence until the restless noise of distraction fades and the darker whispers emerge. Entering therapy, confession, dialogue, spaces where you can dismantle the mask without shame. For some, art becomes rebellion, painting their hidden grief, writing their forbidden rage, sculpting their silent longing. For others, rebellion is lived quietly, in the daily choice to tell the truth. So even when it threatens the image you've polished for decades, the shadow loses its power, not when it is defeated, but when it is integrated. This is the crucial shift. Rebellion is not about destroying the dark, but about reclaiming it as part of your wholeness. Jung called this process individuation, the becoming of a complete self. It is not perfection, not saintliness, but authenticity. The rebel does not say, "I am only light." The rebel says, "I am light and shadow and therefore whole." But here lies the counterintuitive truth. The more you embrace the shadow, the more you discover strength. Anger, when owned, becomes clarity and assertiveness. Envy, when admitted, becomes a compass pointing toward your buried desires. Fear, when faced, becomes wisdom, guiding you away from self-deception. The very forces that once enslaved you become the fuel for transformation. To rebel is to refuse the prison of one-sided identity. It is to stop pretending you are only the mask others accept, and to stand unapologetically as the fractured, luminous, dangerous, radiant being you are. And yes, this rebellion will cost you. Masks are comfortable. Personas win applause. Integration invites judgment, misunderstanding, even rejection. But what is the alternative? A life lived as a ghost, trapped in illusions, directed by a shadow you never dared to confront. Rebellion asks a brutal question. Would you rather be accepted for who you are not, or rejected for who you truly are? The one who chooses the latter is no longer chained. They may lose approval, but they gain authenticity. They may feel fear, but they gain freedom. This is the heart of rebellion, to step into the terrifying honesty of wholeness, to live not as half a person, but as a complete one. And once you taste this freedom, you cannot go back, because the final truth is waiting, deeper still. The rebellion is not the end. It is only the threshold. Beyond it lies the ultimate realization, the insight that transforms not just how you live, but how you understand existence itself. Imagine reaching the end of your life and realizing that the person you presented to the world was never truly you, that your laughter was often forced, your choices dictated by fear, your sacrifices demanded by guilt, your morality shaped more by repression than by love. This is the nightmare that haunts every soul that has lived under the tyranny of the shadow. But if rebellion has begun, if you have dared to turn and face what you have denied, then another possibility opens before you. The ultimate truth is this: the shadow is not your enemy. It is your key. All along, the very thing you feared most was the doorway to the life you sought. The darkness you exiled was not a void meant to destroy you. It was a treasury of power, vitality, and clarity waiting to be reclaimed. Jung called this process integration, but the word feels too clinical for what it truly is. Integration is resurrection. It is the moment when what was dead within you rises again, not as a monster, but as an ally. Think of your anger. Unacknowledged, it poisoned your relationships, exploding in sarcasm, cold silences, or sudden cruelty. But once embraced, anger becomes a sword of justice. It tells you where your boundaries are, what you will no longer allow, what must be protected. The same fire that once burned blindly now forges your dignity. Think of your envy. Buried, it twisted your heart, making you resentful of others' joy. But faced honestly, envy reveals your unspoken desires. It whispers, "This is what you want too. Stop pretending." And suddenly envy ceases to corrode, it begins to guide. It becomes a compass pointing toward your hidden potential. Think of your fear. Denied, it kept you trapped, compulsively busy, endlessly avoiding silence. But when brought into the light, fear shows you what matters. Fear is the shadow of love. It only exists where something precious is at stake. To honor fear is to discover what you truly value, and to act with courage in its presence. The ultimate realization is that the shadow was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to complete you. But this truth is not only personal. Look at history through the same lens, and you see civilizations repeating the same drama. Every war, every oppression, every cruelty of empire was born from a shadow unacknowledged. Nations repress their fears and project them onto outsiders. Religions bury their doubts and burn heretics to silence the reflection. Cultures hide their wounds and create scapegoats to carry the weight. Collective shadows erupt because collective courage failed. If individuals integrate their shadows, they become whole. If societies integrate their shadows, they become humane. The dream of peace is not a dream of perfection, it is a dream of integration. Until we admit the darkness, we will keep destroying ourselves in its name. But here is the deepest paradox. Once you accept the shadow, it disappears as shadow. What was once dark is now simply part of the whole. You are no longer fragmented. You are no longer at war with yourself. You are a full spectrum of being, light and dark, joy and despair, tenderness and rage, humility and pride. The wholeness itself is the freedom. This is why Dostoevsky declared, "Man is what he hides." But once you no longer hide, once you reveal and embrace what was buried, you become something larger than man. You become truth itself, embodied. The cinematic moment of this realization feels like a collapse and a rebirth all at once. The walls of pretense fall, the chains of fear dissolve, and in their place rises a quiet, undeniable strength, the strength of authenticity. Not the fragile power of reputation, not the borrowed power of approval, but the indestructible power of selfhood. The ultimate truth is not that you conquer the shadow, but that you recognize you were never divided to begin with. The division was an illusion created by fear, sustained by denial, inherited from culture. In reality, you were always whole. The shadow is not separate. It is simply the part of you you refuse to see. When you step into this realization, everything changes. Relationships become deeper, because you no longer demand others to carry what you won't acknowledge in yourself. Work becomes meaningful, because it flows not from fear of failure, but from the full expression of your being. Life itself becomes luminous, even in suffering, because you are no longer running from yourself. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." Integration gives you that why, not an external goal, not an imposed identity, but the living experience of being fully yourself. This authenticity is the wellspring from which resilience, creativity, and love flow. And here at the end, the final paradox emerges. The shadow you feared was the doorway to the light you sought. The darkness you rejected was the soil where your freedom grew. The enemy you resisted was your truest companion. To live this truth is to stop searching for salvation outside of yourself. It is to recognize that everything you need for wholeness is already inside you, hidden in the very places you swore you would never look. The final, most powerful realization is this: you are not at the mercy of your shadow. You are the union of opposites, the harmony of contradictions, the living proof that light and dark are not enemies but partners. And so the great question that began this journey, how much of your life is being lived by a version of you that you refuse to see, now has its answer. None of it must be lived unconsciously anymore, for once the shadow is faced, life is no longer fate, it is freedom. So pause now in this very moment, feel the paradox settle into your bones. You are not only the mask, not only the darkness, you are the whole. And when your shadow no longer runs the show, you step onto the stage of your life not as an actor reciting lines, but as the author writing them. This is the ultimate truth. And it was waiting for you all along.